They thought we were dead. They thought 300 years of silence meant extinction. They were wrong. Humanity wasn't extinct, we were just waiting. And when the Vratak Dominion threatened to conquer the galaxy, they learned the most terrifying truth. You don't want to be the species that wakes humanity up. In the vastness of space, silence can mean many things. Sometimes it means peace. Sometimes it means the calm before the storm. And sometimes it means extinction. For 300 years, humanity had been silent. Not by choice, but by necessity. After the Convergence Wars devastated Earth and her colonies, the survivors retreated into the shadows of the galaxy, hiding in the forgotten corners of space, nursing their wounds, rebuilding in secret. To the rest of the galaxy, humanity was nothing more than a cautionary tale, a species that had reached too far, too fast, and paid the ultimate price. The galactic community had moved on. New powers rose. New alliances formed. The seat humanity once held at the Galactic Council remained empty, a symbolic reminder of what happens when a species challenges forces beyond their understanding. Children of a dozen worlds learned about humans in their history programs, always ending with the same conclusion: extinct, or close enough that it made no difference. But the galaxy was about to learn a terrible truth. Humanity wasn't extinct. They had simply been waiting, watching, preparing. And when they finally revealed themselves again, it would be under circumstances no one could have predicted. The Vratak had always been ambitious, a reptilian species from the volcanic world of Krachen. They had spent the last 2 centuries expanding their territory with ruthless efficiency. Where other species sought diplomacy, the Vratak saw weakness. Where others saw borders, they saw suggestions. Their military doctrine was simple: overwhelming force, total subjugation, and the complete assimilation of conquered territories. War Marshal Krektar stood on the command bridge of the devastating Claw, his greatest warship, watching the holographic display of conquered systems pulse with the crimson light of Vratak occupation. 57 star systems now flew their banner. Their armies numbered in the billions. Their fleet could darken the skies of 100 worlds simultaneously. War Marshal, his second-in-command, hissed, mandibles clicking with satisfaction. The Pelion Confederacy has surrendered. Their fleet is destroyed. Their worlds are ours. Krektar's eyes narrowed with pleasure. The Pelions had been strong once, their defensive networks considered impenetrable. It had taken the Vratak 3 months to break them. 3 months of calculated brutality that sent a message to every watching species in the galaxy. Resistance was futile. How many council species remain independent? Krektar asked, his voice a low growl that resonated through the bridge. 17, War Marshal. The others have either fallen to us or submitted to tributary status. The Galactic Council is paralyzed with fear. They cannot agree on a unified response. Each species thinks only of its own survival. Krektar's mandibles spread in what passed for a smile among his kind. Good, fear is the foundation of empire. And what of the Council's defense pact? Their vaunted mutual protection agreement? A dead letter, War Marshal. When we attacked the Pelions, not a single Council fleet came to their aid. The pact died with humanity 300 years ago. They were the only species with the spine to enforce it. The mention of humanity made Krektar pause. He had studied the ancient records, read the accounts of the Convergence Wars. Humanity had been formidable once, their tactical creativity legendary, their refusal to surrender almost pathological. They had stood against impossible odds more than once and somehow survived. But that was ancient history. Their worlds were empty now, their colonies abandoned, their fleets scattered to cosmic dust. The humans were fools, Krektar said dismissively. They exhausted themselves fighting everyone else's battles. They bled themselves dry defending species that contributed nothing in return. A warrior's death is honorable, but a fool's death is simply waste. His second-in-command clicked agreement. Indeed, War Marshal. It is almost fitting that we now conquer what they died trying to protect. Perhaps if they had learned to take instead of give, they might still exist. Krektar turned back to the display, his mind already calculating the next conquests. The Helion Republic would fall within 6 months. The Yundari Collective would capitulate without a fight. And then, the true prize, the core worlds themselves. The heart of galactic civilization, where the Council met in their grand chambers and pretended they still mattered. Prepare the fleet, he commanded. We move on the Helion Republic at first light. I want their surrender before their New Year celebrations. Let them toast their last moments of freedom. Dr. Selentri was exhausted. The Yundari scientist had been working for 16 hours straight, trying to reinforce her people's defensive networks against the inevitable Vratak assault. The six-armed researcher manipulated multiple holographic interfaces simultaneously, her pale blue skin darkening with stress. "It's not enough," she muttered to herself, watching the simulations run. "Even if we perfect the shields, their fleet will simply overwhelm us with numbers. We need allies. We need weapons. We need—" She trailed off as an anomaly appeared on her long-range sensors. At first she thought it was a glitch, a ghost echo from a distant pulsar, but the signal repeated, pulsing with a strange regularity that sent chills down her spinal ridge. "Computer, analyze signal pattern Delta 79, she commanded. The AI's voice responded instantly. "Signal originates from Sector 447, the former human colonial region. Pattern matches no known astronomical phenomenon. Structure suggests artificial origin. Confidence 92%. Selentri's hearts began to race. The former human colonial region had been surveyed dozens of times over the past 3 centuries. Every survey had found the same thing: dead worlds, silent stations, empty orbital platforms. Nothing had lived there since the Convergence Wars. Run a deep analysis. Compare the signal structure to archived human communications protocols. The silence stretched for nearly a minute, an eternity for a quantum processor. When the AI finally responded, there was something in its synthesized voice that almost sounded like uncertainty. "Match found. Signal structure is consistent with human military encryption protocols Generation 7. However, these protocols were classified as lost. All records indicate the encryption keys were destroyed with the human fleet carrier Indomitable in the final battle of the Convergence Wars." Selentri stood frozen, her multiple hands trembling slightly. Generation 7 protocols had been the most sophisticated encryption humanity ever developed. They had never been broken by any galactic power. The humans had made sure of that by destroying every key when defeat seemed inevitable, ensuring their final communications died with them. "Could it be a remnant?" she asked. "An automated system finally breaking down after 3 centuries? Negative. Signal strength is increasing. Transmission began 47 minutes ago and has grown consistently stronger. This is an active powered transmission, not a decaying automated broadcast. Additionally, the signal is modulating in response to local electromagnetic conditions, demonstrating adaptive behavior consistent with supervised transmission." A cold certainty settled over Selentri. She had 2 choices: report this to her government, who would likely dismiss it as a sensor error, or investigate herself. If the Vratak were somehow using human technology, that information could be crucial. And if, by some impossible chance, there were actual humans out there, she made her decision. "Computer, prepare a secure probe. Route it to the signal origin using randomized jump coordinates. I want full stealth protocols. If anything is out there, I want to see it before it sees us." Probe prepared. "Launch in 30 seconds, Dr. Selentri. I feel compelled to note that investigating unknown signals in disputed territory during wartime carries significant personal risk." "Noted and logged," Selentri replied, her hands dancing across the controls. "Launch probe." The probe shot into space, engaging its stealth systems before making its first jump. It would take 3 days to reach Sector 447. 3 days of waiting and wondering. 3 days to hope that maybe, just maybe, humanity's silence was about to end. The probe emerged from its final jump at the edge of Sector 447, immediately going into full passive scanning mode. Selentri watched the data stream in real time, her 6 hands clutching the edges of her workstation with increasing tension. At first, the readings made no sense. The sector was supposed to be empty, but her sensors were detecting massive gravitational anomalies. Not natural ones like black holes or neutron stars, but artificial, as if something enormous was deliberately warping spacetime. "Computer, adjust sensor frequency to compensate for gravitational lensing," she commanded. The display flickered and suddenly the truth revealed itself. Selentri's breath caught in all 3 of her respiratory chambers. Ships, thousands of them, tens of thousands. They hung in the void like a sleeping swarm, their hulls painted in adaptive camouflage that bent light around them. Only by detecting their gravitational signatures could the probe see them at all. The fleet was arranged in precise formations, military formations, spanning hundreds of thousands of kilometers. But these weren't just any ships. As the probe's analysis algorithms worked, identifying hull configurations and comparing them to historical databases, the impossible became undeniable. Human designs, Celentri whispered. But that's how. Not just human designs, she realized as more data flooded in. These were evolved human designs. The basic architecture was there, the distinctive angular hulls, the modular construction philosophy, the redundant systems humanity had favored, but everything had been refined, improved, made deadlier. These ships represented 3 centuries of advancement beyond the already formidable vessels humanity had fielded during the Convergence Wars. The flagship alone was larger than anything the current galaxy had produced. It hung at the center of the formation like a sleeping titan, its hull bristling with weapon emplacements that made Celentri's blood run cold. According to the probe's estimates, that single vessel carried more firepower than the entire Vratak fleet combined. Life signs? She asked, barely able to form the words. Detecting significant biological activity across the fleet. Pattern analysis suggests approximately 12 million individuals distributed throughout the vessels. Species identification is uncertain. Genetic markers are consistent with baseline human DNA, but there are variations. 300 years of isolated evolution, perhaps. Celentri's minds raced. 12 million humans, an armada that could challenge the entire galaxy, hidden for 3 centuries while the rest of the known species struggled and fought and fell. The strategic implications were staggering. What are they doing? She asked. What's their current status? Fleet appears to be in a standby configuration. However, power signatures are increasing across all vessels. This fleet is waking up, Dr. Celentri. Whatever they've been waiting for, I believe it's about to begin. As if in response to the AI's assessment, the probe detected a massive surge of energy from the flagship. A transmission array powered up, one so powerful it could reach every corner of the galaxy simultaneously. The signal that followed was broadcast in 17 languages, including Vratak and Yundari. The voice that emerged was distinctly human, male, with an edge of steel that carried across the void. Attention, species of the Galactic Council. This is Admiral Marcus Chen of the United Human Remnant Fleet. For 300 years we have watched from the shadows. We have seen your peace crumble. We have witnessed the rise of tyranny. We have observed the Vratak Dominion's campaign of conquest and subjugation. We have remained silent, rebuilding, preparing, waiting for the moment when our choice became clear. The transmission paused, and Celentri could almost feel the weight of what was coming. That moment has arrived. As of this broadcast, the United Human Remnant formally rejects the Vratak Dominion's claim to any territory in the galactic community. We reject their right to subjugate free species. We reject their vision of empire, and we offer the following to any species currently under Vratak occupation or threat. Humanity remembers its old promises. Humanity honors its old debts. Humanity has not forgotten why we bled ourselves to near extinction 300 years ago. Another pause. When the voice returned, it carried a note of grim satisfaction. War Marshal Krektar, you were correct about one thing. We did exhaust ourselves fighting everyone else's battles. We did bleed ourselves dry defending species that could not defend themselves. You called it a fool's death. We call it something else. We call it a down payment. And now, after 3 centuries of interest, the bill has come due. This is your only warning. Retreat to your home system. Release all conquered territories and humanity will allow your species to survive. Refuse, and learn why the old galaxy feared us. The transmission ended and Celentri found herself staring at the screen in shock. Around the hidden fleet, engines were beginning to glow. Weapon systems were powering up. The sleeping giant was awakening and it was angry. Krektar's roar of fury shook the command bridge of the devastating claw. Officers flinched at their stations, mandibles clicking nervously. The War Marshal had been in a rage for the past 3 hours, ever since the human transmission had reached them. Ghosts, he snarled, smashing one clawed fist against his command throne. Extinct primitives hiding in the dark, too afraid to show themselves for 300 years, and now they dare threaten the Vratak Dominion? His second-in-command approached cautiously. War Marshal, our intelligence division has analyzed the transmission source. The gravitational anomalies in Sector 447 are consistent with a large fleet presence. If the humans have indeed survived, I don't care if they have 10,000 ships. Krektor interrupted. We have conquered 57 systems. We have broken species that the old humans fought alongside. Do you think I fear a shadow of a dead empire? War Marshal wisdom would suggest wisdom? Krektar's eyes blazed. I'll tell you what wisdom suggests. It suggests that if we show weakness now, if we allow this bluff to go unchallenged, every species we've conquered will rise up. Every tributary will refuse payment. The entire Dominion will crumble because we feared a ghost story. The second in command bowed his head in submission, but ventured one more observation. The old records, War Marshal. The accounts of human combat doctrine. They were concerning. Humanity developed tactics that failed, Krektar finished coldly. That failed to save them from extinction. Whatever they were, they are gone. What remains is a remnant, a shadow, survivors huddling in the dark and trying to bluff their way to safety. Well, they have chosen poorly. The War Marshal activated the fleet-wide communications array. His voice boomed across every Vratak vessel in occupied space, reaching millions of soldiers and crew. Warriors of the Dominion, today we face not a threat but an opportunity. The humans have revealed themselves. They believed their 300 years of silence had made us forget them. They believed we would fear their legend. They are wrong. We do not fear extinction's remnants. We do not negotiate with ghosts. We will find their hidden fleet, crush it utterly, and add humanity's final chapter to our list of conquered species. Prepare for war. The response from his fleet was immediate and thunderous. Warships began moving into attack formations. Troops boarded assault carriers. The entire military apparatus of the Vratak Dominion shifted from occupation mode to total war footing. Krektar stared at the star charts, plotting the quickest route to Sector 447. His strategic mind was already working through the battle plan. The humans had revealed their position a tactical error. He would hit them with everything he had before they could fully deploy. Overwhelming force, the Vratak specialty. Deploy our sensor network, he commanded. I want full reconnaissance of Sector 447 within 12 hours. When we know their exact numbers and positions, we strike. No warnings. No negotiations. We will show the galaxy what happens when dead species try to return from the grave. What Krektar didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Admiral Chen's transmission had been carefully calculated. Every word had been chosen not to intimidate but to provoke. The humans needed the Vratak to attack. They needed the War Marshal's pride to overcome his caution. Because the fleet in Sector 447 wasn't humanity's only secret. It wasn't even their biggest one. The Galactic Council chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives from 17 species all tried to speak at once, their voices creating a cacophony that the translation system struggled to process. At the center of the chamber, High Counselor Vexran of the Pelian Confederacy, or what remained of it, called for order with increasing desperation. Please, we must maintain composure. This benefits no one. Counselor Thalrix of the Helian Republic slammed multiple appendages against his speaking podium. Composure? Composure? The humans have returned with a war fleet. The Vratak are mobilizing for total war and you call for composure? We are about to witness a conflict that will make the Convergence Wars look like a border skirmish. Exactly why we must think clearly, Vexran insisted. We have an opportunity here. If the humans are truly as powerful as their transmission suggests, interrupted Counselor Miraseth of the Yundari Collective. Dr. Selentri had forwarded her probe data directly to the Council, and Miraseth had reviewed it personally. There is no if, Vexran. I have seen the scans. That fleet is real. Those ships are beyond anything we currently field. The question isn't whether the humans can challenge the Vratak. The question is whether we want to be caught between them when it happens. Counselor Brecknor, representing one of the few species not yet conquered or threatened by the Vratak, spoke carefully. We must consider our position. The humans were our allies once, yes, but they also withdrew from galactic affairs. They abandoned us. Why should we trust them now? Because they are offering us exactly what we need, said Counselor Vorpak, his species having recently become a Vratak tributary. A chance to be free. My worlds pay tribute in blood and resources to the Dominion. If the humans can break Vratak power, at what cost? Brecknor countered. The Convergence Wars devastated half the galaxy. Entire star systems became graveyards. Are we so eager to repeat that catastrophe? Vexran raised his voice again. We need more information before making any decisions. I propose we send an official delegation to meet with this Admiral Chen. We need to understand their intentions, their capabilities. There, the chamber doors burst open, and a communications officer rushed in, protocol forgotten in his urgency. High Counselor, emergency transmission from Vratok space. War Marshal Krektar has issued a declaration of total war against the human remnant. The entire Vratok fleet is moving toward Sector 447. He's estimated arrival in 72 hours, and he's issued an ultimatum to the Council. Any species that aids the humans in any way will be considered an enemy of the Dominion and subject to immediate military action. Silence fell over the chamber like a heavy blanket. The representatives looked at each other, and in their eyes was the same calculation: survival. Self-preservation had kept their species alive through centuries of conflict. Why should they risk annihilation now for humans who had abandoned them? But Miraseth stood, all 6 of her arms spread wide in a gesture of defiance. 300 years ago, humanity spent itself defending us. They fought battles for worlds that weren't theirs. They bled for species they barely knew, and when the Convergence Wars ended and they retreated to lick their wounds, we let them go. We didn't help them rebuild. We didn't offer support. We simply forgot them, called them extinct, and moved on. She paused, her voice growing harder. Now they return, and our first instinct is self-preservation? To calculate odds and measure risks, the humans spent 3 centuries preparing for this moment. They could have remained hidden. They could have let the Vratok conquer us all and simply waited for the Dominion to collapse under its own weight. But they didn't. They revealed themselves to defend us. Again. And if we abandon them now, then we deserve whatever tyranny follows. Pretty words, Breknor said coldly. But my species has 6 billion souls. Am I supposed to risk all of them on sentiment? Not sentiment, Miraseth replied. Strategy. The Vratok are coming for all of us eventually. You know this. Every species in this chamber knows this. The only question is whether we face them divided and weak, or whether we stand with the one military force in the galaxy that's ever successfully resisted overwhelming conquest. 300 years ago, humanity stood with us. I move that the Galactic Council formally stand with them now. The vote that followed was not unanimous. It wasn't even close, but it was enough. By a narrow margin, the Galactic Council voted to recognize the United Human Remnant as a legitimate, governmental entity and to declare the Vratok, Dominion's campaign of conquest, illegal under galactic law. It was a meaningless gesture legally. The Council had no enforcement mechanism, no military to back up its declarations. But symbolically it meant everything. For the first time in 300 years, humanity was not alone. Admiral Marcus Chen stood in the observation deck of the UHS Horizon's Edge, humanity's flagship, watching the approaching vessels with a mixture of anticipation and nostalgia. The Yundari ships were smaller than he'd expected, but their formation was textbook perfect, a diplomatic approach pattern designed to show peaceful intent while maintaining defensive capability. The lead vessel is hailing us. Admiral, reported his communications officer. Audio and visual ready. Put them through. The holographic display shimmered and a 6-armed alien appeared. Chen recognized the species immediately from his historical briefings. Yundari, one of the species humanity had fought alongside during the Convergence Wars. This particular individual wore the insignia of a high-ranking scientist. Dr. Salentri, I presume, Chen said, inclining his head respectfully. Your probe was quite sophisticated. We detected it, of course, but we were impressed by the stealth technology. The Yundari always did produce excellent engineers. Salentri's skin flushed a deeper blue surprise. Chen's cultural database informed him. You knew about the probe? We've been monitoring the entire galaxy for 300 years, Doctor. We don't miss much. Chen's expression softened slightly. Thank you for sharing that data with your government. It helped accelerate certain political processes. Admiral Chen, Salentri said, composing herself. I'm here representing the Galactic Council. We have many questions about the fleet's capabilities, our intentions, our plans for dealing with the Vratok, whether we intend to reclaim our old territories, and whether we'll remain engaged with galactic affairs this time. Chen smiled slightly. I've had 300 years to think about this conversation, Doctor. Yes to all of the above, with caveats we can discuss later. But right now I imagine you want to see what you're getting into. He gestured, and the observation deck's windows polarized, revealing what had been hidden by the adaptive camouflage. Hundreds of warships hung in formation, and beyond them thousands more. Manufacturing stations the size of moons. Orbital platforms bristling with weapon systems that made pre-convergence technology look primitive. "This is what 300 years of focused development looks like," Chen said quietly. "No politics, no competing interests, no bureaucracy. Just one goal: make sure that if humanity ever returned to the galaxy, we'd never be vulnerable again." Salentry was speechless, her multiple eyes trying to take in the scope of what she was seeing. How did you survive? How did you hide all of this?" "We didn't hide," Chen corrected. "We simply went to places no one else wanted. Sectors with unstable stars, regions with high radiation, areas considered worthless or dangerous, while the rest of the galaxy focused on habitable worlds and trade routes. We built our civilization in the spaces between. It wasn't easy. We lost millions in the early years, but we survived. We adapted, and we never forgot who we were or what we stood for." "And now you're going to war with the Vratak," Salentry said. "No," Chen replied, his voice hardening. "We're going to end the Vratak threat. There's a difference. War implies two sides fighting for control. This will be a lesson, a demonstration. The galaxy has forgotten what happens when you threaten humanity's friends. The Vratak are about to remember why that's a mistake. They have thousands of ships, Admiral, billions of soldiers, 57 occupied systems, I know. We've been counting." Chen turned away from the window, his eyes meeting Salentry's directly. 300 years ago, humanity made a promise. We promised to stand with the free species of the galaxy against tyranny. We broke that promise when we retreated. That's haunted us for 3 centuries. Generations of humans have grown up in exile, building this fleet, preparing for this moment. Not for conquest, not for revenge, but to fulfill a promise our ancestors made and couldn't keep. He paused, then continued. "The Vratak think we're extinct. They think our legends are exaggerated. They think 300 years has made us weak or desperate. They're wrong on all counts. And in 72 hours, when War Marshal Krektar arrives at these coordinates expecting to find a desperate remnant fleet, he's going to learn the most important lesson in human history." "What lesson is that?" Salentry asked. Chen's smile was cold and utterly without mercy. "That humanity doesn't make promises it can't keep. We just take our time keeping them." The Vratak Armada dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Sector 447 in a formation that had conquered 57 star systems, 5,000 warships arranged in a sphere that could project overwhelming firepower in any direction. War Marshal Krektar stood on the bridge of the devastating claw, his eyes scanning the tactical displays with predatory satisfaction. Initial scans. "Commander," he ordered. War Marshal detecting multiple contacts in the sector. Gravitational signatures consistent with large vessel presence, but we're having difficulty getting precise counts. "Some kind of interference and stealth systems," Krektar interrupted dismissively. "The humans are hiding like prey animals. Flood the sector with active sensors. I want them lit up like festival fires." The Vratak fleet's sensor arrays blazed to life, pumping out enough electromagnetic radiation to scan a dozen star systems. The interference cleared instantly, and the tactical display populated with contacts. Krektar's mandibles spread in triumph. "There, I count. Wait, what am I looking at?" His tactical officer's voice was uncertain. "War Marshal, the computer is having trouble reconciling the data. I'm reading 5,000, no, 10,000, the count keeps changing, and the power signatures are fluctuating wildly." Then, as if a switch had been flipped, the interference vanished completely. The tactical display stabilized, and Krektar found himself staring at something that made his blood run cold. 20,000 contacts, 20,000 human warships arranged in a formation that formed a perfect sphere around the Vratak fleet. They had been surrounded before they even arrived. "Impossible," Krektar whispered. "No species has that many. Incoming transmission, War Marshal. It's from the human flagship." Admiral Chen's face appeared on the main display, and Krektar was struck by how calm he looked. Not triumphant, not angry, just calm, with the patience of someone who had waited a very long time for this moment. "War Marshal Krektar," Chen said, his voice carrying across the bridge. "Thank you for accepting our invitation. We've been preparing for this meeting." "You dare," Krektar began, but Chen simply continued speaking. "Let me save us both some time. You're currently analyzing your tactical situation. You're noticing that your fleet is completely surrounded. You're calculating firing solutions and realizing that no matter which direction you shoot, you'll take fire from multiple angles. You're wondering if you can punch through our formation using your sphere doctrine. You're considering whether this is a bluff, whether we actually have the firepower to back up our numbers. Krektar's claws tightened on his command throne. Every word was exactly what he had been thinking. Let me answer those questions. Chen continued. Yes, you're surrounded. No, you cannot break through. No, this is not a bluff. And yes, we have considered every tactical option available to you. We've been studying your combat doctrine for 300 years, War Marshal. We know how you think, we know how you fight. We know what you're going to do before you do it. You think numbers alone will defeat the Dominion? Krektar snarled. We have conquered species with larger fleets. We have broken defensive networks that were considered unbreakable. Your 300-year exile has made you overconfident human. Has it? Chen's expression didn't change. Then allow me a demonstration. Tactical display mark 773. One of your battle cruisers, the Relentless, if I'm reading your designation correctly. Watch carefully. On the Vratak tactical display, one of their heavy battle cruisers, a vessel that had personally destroyed 17 enemy warships during the conquest of the Pelion Confederacy, suddenly went dark. Not destroyed, dark. Every system simultaneously shut down. Life support, weapons, engines, everything. What Krektar started. We've just disabled your ship using quantum disruption technology, Chen explained, as casually as discussing the weather. Your crew is fine, but the ship is now a billion-ton paperweight. We can do this to any vessel in your fleet, War Marshal. All of them, simultaneously, if we choose. We could end this battle right now without firing a single shot. Krektar's mandibles clicked rapidly, a Vratak stress response. If you could do that, why haven't you? Because I want to give you a choice. Chen leaned forward slightly. You can order your fleet to stand down, return to your home system, and release all conquered territories. If you do this, your species survives. Your people go home. You get to tell yourself you made a tactical retreat in the face of overwhelming force. Your pride takes a hit, but you live. And if I refuse? Chen's eyes went cold. Then you'll learn why the old galaxy called us humanity's fury. Not humanity's strength, not humanity's courage, fury. Because we don't just fight wars, War Marshal. When we're truly provoked, when someone threatens everything we've sworn to protect, we don't seek victory. We seek examples. We make sure that species remember for generations why they should never ever make us angry. You're bluffing, Krektar said, but there was less certainty in his voice now. No species would. You studied our history, Chen interrupted. So you know about Earth's World War II. You know about the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 2 cities destroyed in an instant to end a war. We did that to ourselves, War Marshal, our own species. Imagine what we're willing to do to species that threaten our allies. The bridge was silent except for the hum of equipment. Krektar's officers were looking at him, waiting for orders. His pride screamed at him to attack, to show these arrogant humans what Vratak fury looked like. But his survival instincts, honed through decades of warfare, were screaming even louder. You have 30 seconds to make your choice, Chen said quietly. Stand down, or learn why humanity spent 300 years preparing for this moment. Choose wisely. 29, 28, 27. Krektar's mind raced through his options at lightning speed. His entire military career, every conquest, every victory had been built on one fundamental principle: never show weakness. The moment a predator shows weakness, it becomes prey. The Vratak Dominion existed because other species feared them. If he retreated now, that fear would evaporate. But something about the human admiral's demeanor unsettled him. There was no bravado in Chen's voice. No anger, no triumph. Just the calm certainty of someone stating simple facts. This wasn't a warrior trying to intimidate an opponent. This was an engineer explaining how a machine worked. 10, 9, 8. War Marshal, his second-in-command, hissed urgently. We must decide. The quantum disruption could spread to, I know, Krektar snapped. His tactical computer was showing him the nightmare scenario. 20,000 human ships, each potentially capable of that quantum disruption technology. They could disable his entire fleet in minutes. But would they? Could they really? 5, 4, 3. You want to know if I'm bluffing? Chen said, reading his hesitation perfectly. Let me show you. On the tactical display, 50 more Vratak ships went dark simultaneously. Then 50 more. Then 100. Like lights being turned off across a city, Krektar's fleet was being systematically disabled. His officers shouted reports of dead systems, panicking crews, engineering teams reporting complete power failures they couldn't explain. Stop! Krektar roared. Stop this! The disabling ceased. 201 ships floated dead in space. The rest of his fleet remained operational, but the message was crystal clear. Chen could have taken them all. War Marshal Krektar, Chen said, and now there was something almost like sympathy in his voice. I understand what you're feeling right now. Your pride is telling you to fight. Your training is telling you never to surrender. Your position demands strength. I understand all of that because 300 years ago, my ancestors faced the same choice. Fight and die, or retreat and survive. Chen paused, letting that sink in. They chose survival. They chose to live with the shame of retreat so that future generations could have a chance. It was the hardest decision they ever made. And now I'm offering you the same choice, not because I'm merciful, but because I'm practical. A dead war marshal can't order the release of occupied territories. A destroyed fleet can't escort conquered peoples back to their homeworlds. I need you alive, Krektar, not because I like you, but because you're useful. Krektar's claws scraped against his command throne. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to attack, to die in glorious battle rather than suffer the humiliation of surrender. But he thought of his people, of the Vratak homeworld of Krachen, of the billions who would suffer if he chose pride over survival. If I agree to your terms, he said slowly, each word tasting like poison, what guarantees do I have that you won't simply destroy us anyway once we're vulnerable? You have my word, Chen replied simply. And if that's not enough, you have this. Humanity doesn't want an empire. We don't want territory. We don't want tribute. We want exactly what we wanted 300 years ago, a galaxy where species can develop freely without the threat of conquest. You're not useful to me, dead War Marshal. But you're very useful to me as an example, the species that tried to conquer the galaxy, who backed down when they met a superior force. That story serves my purposes much better than your death. Krektar closed his eyes, and in that moment, he aged a decade. When he opened them again, the fire of conquest had dimmed to embers. I accept your terms, he said quietly. The Vratak Dominion will withdraw to our home system. We will release all occupied territories. We will, his voice cracked slightly, we will submit to whatever monitoring you require to ensure compliance. Thank you, War Marshal, Chen said, and the genuine respect in his tone was somehow worse than mockery would have been. Your ships will be restored to full functionality in 30 seconds. You'll find detailed withdrawal plans transmitted to your fleet's computers. We've taken the liberty of optimizing your retreat routes to minimize encounters with hostile liberated populations. I suggest you follow them exactly. The connection ended and power began flowing back into the disabled Vratak ships. Around Krektar, his bridge crew sat in stunned silence. They had just witnessed the impossible, the Vratak Dominion's unconditional surrender. Commander, Krektar said wearily, transmit orders to all occupied systems. Begin immediate withdrawal. All military forces are to return to Krachen. All territorial claims are hereby renounced. As the orders went out, as his empire began its dissolution, Krektar stared at the human fleet surrounding him. They hadn't fired a single shot. They had defeated the most powerful military force in the galaxy without firing a single shot, and somehow that made it so much worse. The news spread through the galaxy at light speed, carried by quantum comm relays and desperate hope. The Vratak were withdrawing. The occupation was ending. Species that had spent years, some even decades, under Dominion control watched with disbelief as Vratak military forces packed up and left. On the Pelion homeworld, Councillor Vexeron stood in the capital city's central square, watching Vratak troop carriers lift off into the sky. Around him, thousands of Pelions had gathered, many weeping openly. His species had been conquered only months ago, their military crushed, their pride shattered. The occupation had been brutal, efficient, and seemingly permanent. Now it was simply over. "Is this real?" asked his aide, a young Pelion who had never known anything but Vratak rule. "Are they really leaving?" "They're really leaving," Vexran confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "The humans kept their promise. After 300 years, they kept their promise." Similar scenes played out across 57 star systems. On industrial worlds, Vratak overseers abandoned their posts. On agricultural planets, tribute collectors left warehouses full of unpaid goods. On mining colonies, work camps were simply unlocked, guards departing without a word. But it wasn't entirely peaceful. On some worlds, resistance movements that had fought Vratak occupation for years weren't content to let their oppressors simply walk away. There were skirmishes, acts of revenge, last desperate battles between species who had grown to hate each other. That's when humanity revealed another capability. Human peacekeeping forces materialized throughout the occupied territories. With startling speed, not the battle fleet, those ships remained in Sector 447, a silent reminder of what would happen if the Vratak reneged. These were different vessels, hospital ships, supply transports, and fast frigates painted in distinctive white and blue patterns. Commander Sarah Okonkwo led one such peacekeeping detachment to a contested world where Pelion resistance fighters had trapped a Vratak garrison in their command compound. She dropped into the middle of the standoff with 3 companies of human peacekeepers, their armor marked with the ancient blue helmets of Earth's long-defunct United Nations. "Stand down. All parties," she broadcast on all frequencies. "This is the United Human Remnant Peacekeeping Force. The war is over. The Vratak have surrendered and are withdrawing. Further violence serves no purpose." The Pelion resistance commander, a scarred veteran named Colvin, responded immediately. "Commander Okonkwo, these Vratak murdered 3,000 of my people during the occupation. They deserve to face justice, not escape into the night." "I agree," Sarah replied calmly, "which is why they will face justice. We're establishing war crimes tribunals on 7 neutral worlds. Every Vratak commander, every overseer, every guard accused of atrocities will stand trial. We have records, Commander Colvin. 300 years of observation means we have detailed documentation of everything the Vratak did. Everyone who committed crimes will be held accountable." Inside the Vratak compound, Garrison Commander Threlkak watched the human peacekeepers establish a perimeter with professional efficiency. His options had just narrowed to one: surrender to the humans and face trial, or die fighting the Pelion resistance. It wasn't really a choice. "This is Garrison Commander Threlkak," he broadcast. "We surrender to human authority. We request protection from hostile forces and fair trial under galactic law." Sarah's response was immediate. "Surrender accepted. Lay down your weapons and exit the compound in single file. You will be transported to a secure facility pending trial. Any resistance will be met with appropriate force. Any cooperation will be noted in your legal proceedings." Over the next 3 hours, Sarah and her peacekeepers disarmed both the Vratak garrison and the Pelion resistance, established a buffer zone, and began the complicated process of documentation and prisoner processing. It was messy, tense work, with emotions running high on all sides. Colvin approached Sarah as the last Vratak prisoners were being loaded onto transport. "Commander, I need to understand something. Why protect them? After everything they've done? Why not just let us have our justice?" Sarah met his eyes steadily. "Because justice and revenge aren't the same thing, Commander. And because 300 years ago humanity made a mistake. We thought military victory was enough. We won battles, but we didn't build the peace that followed. We didn't establish the systems needed to prevent the next war. We won't make that mistake again." She gestured to the peacekeepers working around them, humans processing documentation, setting up medical stations, coordinating supply distribution. "This is the real work of peace, Commander Colvin. It's not glorious. It's not satisfying. But it's necessary. Your people will have justice. Every Vratak who committed crimes will face trial. But it will be real justice, not a massacre. Because the galaxy you want to rebuild can't be built on revenge. Trust me, we tried that once. It didn't work. 6 months after the Vratak surrender, The first war crimes tribunal convened on the neutral world of Sanctum 7. The courtroom was massive, designed to accommodate representatives from all affected species, media from across the galaxy, and the accused themselves. Judge Advocate General Patricia Morrison presided, a stern woman who had spent 30 years preparing for this moment. The humans had established a complete legal framework during their exile, learning from every historical example of post-war justice, from Nuremberg to the International Criminal Court, to conflicts Earth had barely survived. The first case was War Marshal Krektar himself. He stood in the defendant's area, stripped of his military regalia, his scales looking dull under the courtroom lights. Behind him sat his defense counsel, ironically, a human lawyer named David Park, who had volunteered to ensure even the most hated defendant received proper representation. War Marshal Krektar, Morrison began, her voice echoing through the chamber. You are charged with 3,742 counts of crimes against sapient species, including but not limited to unauthorized warfare, genocide, forced displacement, torture, and the illegal occupation of sovereign territories. How do you plead? Krektar stood silent for a long moment. The courtroom held its breath. Then, in a voice stripped of all his former arrogance, he spoke. I plead guilty to all charges. The courtroom erupted. Representatives from conquered species shouted in anger and satisfaction. Media correspondents scrambled to report this unprecedented admission. Morrison's gavel came down repeatedly before order was restored. War Marshal, she said once silence returned, you understand that this plea carries a potential sentence of life imprisonment or, under certain jurisdictions, execution? I understand, Krektar replied. I offer no excuses. I conquered because I could. I subjugated because it served my ambition. I believed might made right, and I was wrong. I was. He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I was a tyrant, and tyrants deserve punishment. David Park leaned over to whisper urgently to his client, but Krektar shook his head. No, counselor. I will not hide behind legal technicalities. Admiral Chen showed me mercy when he could have destroyed my fleet. The least I can do is show honor in defeat. What followed was a trial unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Evidence was presented, 300 years' worth of surveillance data that humanity had meticulously compiled. Video recordings of atrocities, testimony from survivors, documentation of systematic oppression. It was damning, comprehensive, and undeniable, but the defense was allowed to speak. David Park, despite his client's guilty plea, presented context. He showed how the Vratak Dominion had grown from a species struggling to survive on a harsh volcanic world, how their aggressive expansion had been driven by resource scarcity, how their military culture had evolved from desperate defense into toxic conquest. None of this excuses the crimes, Park argued, but it explains them. War Marshal Krektar is not a monster from myth. He is the product of a system, a culture, a set of circumstances that turned survival instincts into instruments of oppression. If we want to prevent the next Krektar, we need to understand how this one was created. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witness after witness testified. Experts analyzed military decisions. Philosophers debated the nature of command responsibility. And through it all, Krektar sat silently, listening to the accounting of his crimes, accepting each condemnation without protest. When the verdict came, it was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Morrison stood to deliver the sentence. War Marshal Krektar, you have been found guilty of crimes that resulted in the deaths of millions and the suffering of billions. The weight of your guilt is beyond calculation. However, this tribunal has also considered your complete cooperation, your admission of guilt, and your testimony that has helped us understand and prevent similar crimes in the future. She paused, and the courtroom leaned forward collectively. Therefore, it is the judgment of this tribunal that you be sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after serving a minimum of 50 years. You will spend this time on the prison world of atonement, where you will participate in restorative justice programs and, if you choose, assist in the education of future generations about the dangers of unchecked militarism. Krektar bowed his head. Thank you, Judge Morrison. I accept this sentence, and I ask, is there any way I might address those I have harmed? Morrison considered, then nodded. You may speak. Krektar turned to face the gallery where representatives of conquered species sat. His voice, once commanding and full of arrogant power, was now quiet and heavy with genuine remorse. I cannot undo what I have done. I cannot bring back your dead or restore your stolen years. I can only say that I was wrong. I was wrong to believe that strength justified conquest. I was wrong to think that other species existed for Vratak benefit. I was wrong to prioritize my ambition over your freedom. If my punishment serves as a warning to others who might follow my path, then perhaps some small good can come from my evil. I am sorry, and I know that is not enough. It will never be enough. In the gallery, reactions varied. Some species representatives wept with anger. Others sat in stony silence. A few surprisingly nodded in acknowledgement. Not forgiveness that would take generations if it ever came at all, but acknowledgement that this was a beginning. 1 year after the Vratak surrender, the Galactic Council reconvened in their chambers on the core world of Centrum Prime. But the assembly looked very different than it had in centuries. New seats had been added. Old power structures had been dismantled. And at the center of it all, humanity had taken its place once more. Admiral Chen, now also holding the title of ambassador, sat in the reconstituted human seat. He looked older than he had during the confrontation with Krektar, the weight of rebuilding a galaxy evident in the lines around his eyes. High Counselor Vexeron called the session to order. This council recognizes Ambassador Chen of the United Human Remnant. The floor is yours. Chen stood and the chamber fell silent. Every species represented remembered the transmission from Sector 447, the fleet that had changed everything. Now they would learn what humanity wanted in return for their intervention. Members of the Galactic Council, Chen began. 300 years ago, humanity sat in this very chamber and made a series of promises. We promised to defend free species against aggression. We promised to honor our alliances. We promised to stand as a bulwark against tyranny. Then we failed. We exhausted ourselves, retreated, and left you to face new threats alone. For that failure, I offer you our deepest apologies. He paused, letting that sink in. An apology from humanity, the species that had just demonstrated overwhelming military superiority, carried weight. But apologies are meaningless without action. Chen continued. So today I want to present a new framework for galactic governance. Not one imposed by human will, but one built on 3 centuries of hard-learned lessons. We call it the Mutual Defense and Development Compact. Holographic displays activated throughout the chamber, showing the proposed structure. Representatives leaned forward, studying the details. The core principle is simple, Chen explained. No species stands alone. Every member of this compact commits to the mutual defense of all other members. An attack on one is an attack on all. But and this is crucial, defense is not enough. We also commit to mutual development. Species with advanced technology share it. Species with abundant resources assist those in need. Species with expertise in governance help those struggling with internal stability. We rise together, or we fall separately. Counselor Brecknor, who had been skeptical of human intervention from the beginning, raised an objection. Ambassador Chen, this sounds remarkably like the old Defense Pact, the one that failed when humanity withdrew. What makes you think it will work this time? Because this time humanity isn't the only enforcer, Chen replied. Look at your displays. We're proposing a rotating joint defense force with ships and personnel contributed by all member species. Humanity will contribute the most initially, yes, because we have the most developed fleet. But over the next 50 years, as we share our technology and shipbuilding expertise, the force becomes truly multinational. No single species can withdraw and collapse the entire structure. Dr. Salentri, now representing the Yundari Collective on the Council, spoke up. Ambassador, the technology sharing provision, you're offering to share the quantum disruption technology, the adaptive camouflage, the manufacturing techniques that built your fleet? All of it, Chen confirmed, with appropriate safeguards, training programs, and phase-in periods. We're not going to hand over weapons of mass destruction to species still figuring out their political systems. But yes, everything we developed during our exile will be shared, because the only way to prevent another Vratak Dominion is to make sure that no single military force can dominate the galaxy through technological superiority, including your own. Counselor Miraseth observed shrewdly. Especially our own, Chen agreed. We spent 300 years building overwhelming military power. Now we're going to spend the next 300 years making sure that power becomes obsolete through widespread development. A galaxy where everyone has advanced defensive capabilities is a galaxy where conquest becomes impossible. The debate that followed was intense and lasted for days. Some species worried about human dominance. Others feared the cost of such an ambitious compact. A few questioned whether the technology sharing was even feasible. But slowly, as the details were discussed and refined, support built. Species that had been conquered by the Vratak understood the value of collective security. Species that had watched helplessly from the sidelines realized they needed to be part of the solution. Even former Vratak tributaries, now freed, saw the compact as their best chance for lasting security. The vote, when it finally came, was not unanimous, but it was overwhelming. The Mutual Defense and Development Compact was ratified by 43 species, with more expected to join in the following months. As the council adjourned, Vexran approached Chen privately. "Ambassador, can I ask you something? What does humanity gain from all this? You have the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. You could dictate terms. You could claim territories. You could build an empire that would make the Vratak Dominion look insignificant. Why share your advantages?" Chen smiled tiredly. "Because we tried the empire route once, Counselor. Earth's history is full of empires, Roman, British, American, Chinese. All of them fell eventually, most of them violently. We learned that you can't build lasting peace through dominance. You can only build it through partnership." He gestured out the window at the stars beyond. "Humanity doesn't want to rule the galaxy, Counselor Vexran. We just want to make sure the galaxy is safe enough for everyone to thrive. That's all we ever wanted, and this time, we're not going to exhaust ourselves trying to do it alone." 2 years after the surrender, something unexpected was happening on the Vratak homeworld of Krachen. A revolution, but not the violent kind. A revolution of thought. Prime Counselor Shekral, who had assumed leadership after Krektar's imprisonment, stood before the Vratak assembly, proposing what would have been unthinkable just years before, joining the Mutual Defense and Development Compact. "Fellow Vratak," she hissed, her voice carrying across the ancient chamber carved from volcanic rock. "We stand at a crossroads. We can cling to our old ways, remain isolated, nursing our wounded pride and dreaming of past glory, or we can choose transformation." The assembly erupted in angry clicks and hisses. Conservative members shouted protests. Military traditionalists demanded her removal. But Shekral waited patiently for silence, and when it came, she continued. "I have spent 2 years studying what happened to us. Not the military defeat that is obvious, but how we got to the point where defeat was inevitable. And I have concluded that our downfall began not when we met the human fleet, but centuries before, when we decided that conquest was the only path to greatness." She activated a holographic display showing Krachen's resources depleting over centuries. "We conquered because we told ourselves we needed resources. But look at the data. For every world we conquered, we spent 3 times its value on military maintenance. We bankrupted ourselves pursuing an empire that never made economic sense. We did it for pride, for the feeling of dominance, and it nearly destroyed us." A young assembly member named Vreknor, part of a new generation raised after the surrender, stood to speak. "Prime Counselor, many here fear that joining the compact means submitting to human dominance. How do you respond?" I respond by asking, "What is submission?" Shekral replied, "The humans have ships in our system, yes, but they are guarding us as much as watching us. Last month, when the Krax pirates attempted to raid our outer colonies, who drove them off? Human peacekeepers. When our southern continent suffered volcanic eruptions that destroyed 3 cities, who provided emergency supplies and medical aid? Human relief ships." She paused, letting that register. "The humans defeated us, absolutely. They could have enslaved us, occupied us, dismantled our civilization. Instead, they offered us justice, assistance, and a path forward. That is not conquest. That is the kind of strength we should have aspired to." Over the following weeks, the debate raged throughout Vratak society. Some saw the compact as humiliation, others saw it as opportunity. But slowly, as the benefits of cooperation became clear, as Vratak engineers began training with human counterparts, as joint development projects began to flourish, opinion shifted. The final vote was narrow, but decisive. Krachen would join the compact. The species that had nearly conquered the galaxy would now help defend it. When Ambassador Chen arrived for the signing ceremony, Prime Counselor Shekral met him at the spaceport. The meeting was broadcast live across the galaxy, and what happened next surprised everyone. Shekral performed the Vratak gesture of deep respect, lowering her head and extending her claws, palms up, a posture of complete vulnerability. Ambassador Chen, on behalf of my people, I offer our gratitude. You had every right to destroy us. You showed mercy instead. You had every reason to exclude us from the compact. You included us instead. We will not forget this. We will not waste this chance. Chen returned the gesture, adapting it to human physiology as best he could. Prime Counselor, humanity doesn't believe in eternal enemies. We believe in growth, change, and second chances. We welcome the Vratak people as partners in building a better galaxy. The ceremony that followed was simple but profound. The Vratak signature joined 46 others on the Compact Charter. The species that had threatened galactic peace now committed to defending it. 10 years after the Vratak surrender, the galaxy looked fundamentally different. The Mutual Defense and Development Compact had grown to include 73 species. Joint defense forces patrolled trade routes. Technology-sharing programs had accelerated development across hundreds of worlds, and humanity had begun training the next generation of galactic defenders. At the Orbital Defense Academy above Earth, rebuilt and restored during the past decade, Commander Sarah Okonkwo watched a diverse class of cadets run tactical simulations. Humans worked alongside Yundari, Pelians, Helians, and even young Vratak. Species that had been enemies now trained together, learned together, planned together. One simulation caught her attention. A mixed team, 2 humans, a Yundari, and a Vratak was attempting to resolve a hostage situation on a disputed colony world. The team lead was the Vratak cadet, Krelvin, and Sarah watched with approval as he coordinated his team with efficiency and, more importantly, compassion. When the simulation ended successfully, Sarah called the team to debriefing. Good work, all of you. Krelvin. Particularly impressive leadership. You prioritized civilian safety over tactical advantage. That's not traditional Vratak doctrine. Krelvin's mandibles clicked in what Sarah had learned was their equivalent of a smile. My father fought in War Marshal Krektar's fleet, Commander. He told me about the surrender, about watching the human fleet surround them without firing. He said he learned more about real strength in that moment than in all his years of conquest. I'm trying to learn the same lesson. Your father sounds like a wise individual, Sarah replied. What does he do now? He's a teacher, Commander. On Krachen, he teaches young Vratak about the cost of unchecked aggression, about how true warriors protect rather than conquer, about... Krelvin paused, seeming almost embarrassed, about how humans showed us a better way. After the cadets were dismissed, Sarah found herself in Admiral Chen's office, now converted to a teaching space at the academy. Chen, now in his 60s and semi-retired from active service, spent his days training the next generation of leaders. The Vratak integration is going better than anyone predicted, Sarah observed, taking a seat. Because we gave them a genuine path forward, Chen replied, looking out at the cadet barracks where dozens of species bunked together. 300 years ago, after our wars on Earth, we often made the mistake of humiliating defeated enemies. We imposed harsh terms, extracted tribute, and wondered why they wanted revenge. This time we offered partnership from day one. Not everyone approved, Sarah reminded him. I remember the protests. Species that had suffered under Vratak occupation didn't want them in the compact. No, they didn't. And their pain was valid, still is. Chen turned from the window. But we learned something during our exile, Sarah. We learned that holding on to hate is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. The species that moved past their anger fastest are the ones rebuilding fastest now, and the Vratak that have genuinely changed are our most dedicated partners. He pulled up a holographic display showing galactic defense response times. Look at this. Last month, a Krax raiding fleet tried to hit a Pelion colony. You know who responded fastest? A Vratak peacekeeping ship. War Marshal Krektar's former third officer, actually, now commanding a defensive cruiser. He drove off the raiders and stayed for 3 days helping with reconstruction. The Pelians sent a formal commendation. "Things we never thought we'd see," Sarah said softly. "Things our ancestors would have thought impossible," Chen agreed. "But that's the point. We're building a galaxy where the impossible becomes routine, where former enemies become allies, where the cycle of revenge and conquest finally breaks." There was a knock on the door and Dr. Salantree entered, now serving as Dean of Xenological Studies at the Academy. "Admiral, Commander, sorry to interrupt. I wanted to share something before the semester ends." She activated her datapad, showing footage of the cadet graduation ceremony planned for next week. "We have 217 cadets graduating. 47 different species. They've spent 4 years living together, studying together, learning each other's languages and customs and combat doctrines. They've become a family. And, more importantly," she continued, her 6 hands gesturing expressively, "they've become the model. 17 other academies across the galaxy are using our integrated training program. In 20 years, every defense force in the compact will have officers who grew up side by side with former enemies. That's how you build lasting peace, not through treaties or weapons, but through relationships." Chen nodded slowly, a slight smile on his weathered face. "My great-grandfather used to tell me about the early days after the Convergence Wars. He said the saddest part wasn't the death toll or the destroyed worlds. It was watching alliances crumble, because nobody knew how to build institutions that could outlast individual leaders. We vowed never to make that mistake again." He looked at the footage of young cadets, barely adults, representing dozens of species that had been strangers or enemies just years before. "These kids are that institution. In 30 years, they'll be admirals and generals and counselors. And when they make decisions, they'll remember their Yundari bunkmate, or their Vratak study partner, or their human training officer. They'll think of people, not just species. That's how you change a galaxy." 15 years after the Vratak surrender, Admiral Marcus Chen returned to Sector 447 one final time. The coordinates where he had confronted War Marshal Krektar were now home to something unprecedented. The Memorial Station, a massive orbital platform dedicated to remembering all the conflicts that had shaped the modern galaxy. The dedication ceremony brought together leaders from across the compact. Counselors, admirals, former soldiers, and survivors of occupation all gathered to witness the unveiling of monuments to the fallen of a dozen conflicts, including the Convergence Wars. Chen stood before a memorial wall inscribed with the names of every human who had died in those ancient wars, millions of names, covering an area the size of a city block. His hand traced a few names he recognized from his historical studies, people who had died 300 years before he was born, but whose sacrifice had made his life possible. "Admiral Chen," a familiar voice said behind him. Chen turned to find War Marshal Krektar, now simply Krektar, prisoner no longer standing with Prime Counselor Shekral. The former War Marshal had been released on parole after 12 years of exemplary behavior, and had spent the past 3 years working with reconciliation programs throughout former Vratak territories. "Krektar," Chen acknowledged with a slight nod. "Prime Counselor, I didn't expect to see you here. Where else would we be?" Shekral replied. "This station honors all who died in the conflicts that shaped us. That includes millions of Vratak who died in our wars of conquest. Soldiers who believed they were serving their species, who never questioned orders, who died for a cause that was wrong from the beginning." Krektar stepped forward, his movement slower now, age and imprisonment having taken their toll. "Admiral, I have spent the past 15 years thinking about our encounter, about the moment you surrounded my fleet and I chose surrender over destruction. I need to know if I had chosen differently. If I had ordered my fleet to fight, would you really have destroyed us all?" Chen met his eyes steadily. "Yes," without hesitation. "With great hesitation, but yes. I would have mourned every life lost, yours and mine. I would have carried that weight for the rest of my days. But I would have done it, because the alternative was letting your campaign of conquest continue. Sometimes the most moral choice is the one that costs the most." Krektar was silent for a long moment, processing this. Then, surprisingly, he extended his hand in the human gesture of respect he had learned. "Thank you for your honesty, and thank you for giving me the choice. Many conquerors in your position would have simply destroyed us and justified it as justice. You offered mercy, even though we had shown none to others. That has haunted me every day since, in a good way. They shook hands, the gesture captured by media representatives from 100 worlds. The image would become iconic. Former enemies, reconciled not through forced forgiveness but through honest acknowledgement of the past. The dedication ceremony itself was simple but profound. Speaker after speaker told stories of loss and recovery, of pain and healing, of enemies who had become friends. The station's central chamber was opened, revealing a massive holographic display showing every known species in the galaxy, connected by lines of alliance and cooperation. When Chen's turn came to speak, he kept his remarks brief. This station exists to remember. Not just to remember the dead, though we owe them that. Not just to remember the wars, though we must never forget their cost, but to remember why we fight in the first place. He gestured to the assembled representatives. 300 years ago, humanity fought because we believed that freedom was worth defending. That belief cost us dearly. We retreated, we hid, we spent generations rebuilding in the dark, but we never abandoned that belief. And when the Vratak threatened to plunge the galaxy into a new age of conquest, we returned because that belief demanded it. Chen's voice grew stronger. But here's what we learned in exile. Fighting for freedom isn't enough. You have to build the institutions that preserve it. You have to create the relationships that sustain it. You have to teach the next generation why it matters. This station, this compact, these alliances, they are how we do that. They are how we make sure that 300 years from now, our descendants won't be fighting the same wars we fought. He paused, looking out at the faces of a dozen species, some who had been allies, some who had been enemies, all now partners in something unprecedented. My great-grandfather used to tell me that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of justice. And justice isn't something you achieve once and forget about. It's something you build day by day, choice by choice, generation by generation. That's what we're doing here. That's what this station represents. Not the end of our struggles, but our commitment to keep struggling for something better. The applause that followed was genuine and sustained. As the ceremony concluded and representatives began to mingle, discussing trade agreements and cultural exchanges and joint research projects, Chen found himself approached by a young human cadet, barely 20, wearing the uniform of the Defense Academy. "Admiral Chen, sir," the cadet said nervously. "I'm Cadet Yuki Tanaka. I just wanted to say, my great-great-grandmother was on the generation ship that left Earth after the Convergence Wars. She died before reaching the exile colonies. I grew up hearing stories about the old galaxy, about the wars, about the retreat, and I always wondered if we'd ever come back. And now?" Chen asked gently. "Now I'm training alongside Vratak cadets whose grandfathers tried to conquer the galaxy. And we're friends, sir. Real friends. We argue about tactics and compare our cultural histories and help each other with homework. And it's just normal. Like this is how it was always supposed to be." Chen felt his eyes sting slightly. "That's exactly how it was supposed to be, Cadet Tanaka. Your great-great-grandmother would be very proud." As the cadet moved away, Chen looked around the station one last time, at the memorials to the dead, at the living representatives of 100 worlds, at the young cadets of mixed species preparing for a future their ancestors couldn't have imagined. And he felt for the first time in his long career that humanity's promise had finally been kept. 20 years after the Vratak surrender, the galaxy had entered what historians were already calling the Long Peace. No major conflicts. No wars of conquest. The compact now included 91 species, and applications continued to arrive from distant regions finally hearing about the new order. But peace had its costs, and not everyone was willing to pay them. On the frontier world of Terminus VI, a protest had turned violent. A faction of human colonists calling themselves the Purity Front had blockaded the spaceport, preventing Vratak engineers from arriving to help with terraforming operations. Commander Sarah Okonkwo, now a captain and commanding the peacekeeping cruiser UHS Vigilant, dropped into orbit with a heavy heart. She knew the Purity Front's rhetoric. Humanity had gone soft. Humanity was forgetting its own interests. Humanity was helping species that would have destroyed them given the chance. She opened a channel to the protest leaders. "This is Captain Okonkwo of the UHS Vigilant. You are in violation of compact law. Stand down immediately and allow the Vratak engineering team to land." The response came from Marcus Wade, a third-generation exile colonist whose family had lost members in the Convergence Wars. "Captain, we're not stopping Vratak engineers. We're stopping our own extinction." Every day we let former enemies into our worlds, we risk another betrayal. Our grandparents died fighting these species. Have you forgotten that? I haven't forgotten anything, Sarah replied, her voice hard. My own grandfather died at the Battle of Hadrian's Gate, killed by convergence forces. But I also remember what he fought for. He fought so that future generations wouldn't have to live in perpetual war. That's what peace means, Mr. Wade. Sometimes it means working with people whose ancestors fought your ancestors. Easy words from someone in orbit, Wade shot back. You don't have to live with them. You don't have to trust them with your safety. Come down here and say that to the families of the dead. Sarah made a decision. Very well. Vigilant, maintain position. I'm taking a shuttle down, alone and unarmed. Her second officer immediately objected. Captain, that's an order, Sarah finished. They want to talk to someone who understands their pain. Let's give them that chance. 30 minutes later, Sarah stood in the middle of the blockade facing Marcus Wade and about 200 protesters. Some looked angry. Some looked scared. All looked determined. You came, Wade said, surprised. You asked. I listened. That's how this works. Sarah looked around at the gathered colonists. You're right that I don't live down here. I don't have to see former enemies every day. But I do have to enforce the compact that keeps all of us safe, including you. Safe? A woman in the crowd shouted. How are we safe letting Vratak onto our world? They tried to conquer everything. 20 years ago, yes, Sarah acknowledged. And they failed. They surrendered. They faced justice. They changed. But here's what you're missing. The Vratak aren't the only former enemies in the compact. The Helians fought humanity in the Convergence Wars. So did the Yundari briefly. So did half a dozen other species now building the peace alongside us. She paused, letting that register. If we exclude everyone who was ever an enemy, we're left with nobody. And that's exactly what leads to the next war. You want to honor your dead? Honor them by making sure their sacrifices meant something. Make sure the galaxy they died for is better than the one they left behind. Pretty speech, Wade said bitterly. But words don't bring back the dead. No, they don't, Sarah agreed softly. Nothing does. But here's what I can tell you. Those Vratak engineers you're blocking. One of them is Krelvin, War Marshal Krektar's nephew. His father died in the surrender fleet, torn apart by guilt over what his species had become. Krelvin grew up in a reformed Vratak society. Learning about the crimes his people committed, he became an engineer specifically to help rebuild worlds his species damaged. She pulled up a holographic display, showing images of Krelvin working on reconstruction projects across former Vratak territory. He spent 5 years repairing the infrastructure his own military destroyed. He doesn't have to do this. He could have lived comfortably on Krachen. But he chose atonement through action. That's who you're blocking. Not a monster. Not a threat. A person trying to make amends for crimes he didn't commit. The crowd was quieter now, some protesters looking uncertain. Wade's jaw was set, but Sarah could see doubt in his eyes. I'm not asking you to forgive the Vratak, Sarah continued. I'm not asking you to forget what they did. I'm asking you to recognize that holding on to hate hurts you more than it hurts them. And I'm asking you to trust the compact that has kept this galaxy at peace for 2 decades. She turned specifically to Wade. Your grandparents died fighting for a better future. Don't dishonor them by refusing to live in it. The standoff lasted another hour, tense and uncertain. But slowly, protesters began to leave. Not all of them, some remained committed to their cause. But enough drifted away that when the Vratak shuttle finally landed, it did so without violence. Krelvin emerged looking nervous but determined. Sarah met him at the landing pad. Welcome to Terminus C, engineer. Sorry about the reception. I understand their anger, Krelvin replied quietly. I carry it myself in a different way. The anger at what my people became. At the crimes committed in our name. If they need to shout at me to heal, I can bear it. That's more grace than most people could manage, Sarah observed. I learned it from humans, Krelvin said simply. Admiral Chen could have destroyed my uncle's fleet. Your people could have excluded us from the compact. Instead, you offered us a path forward. The least I can do is walk it with dignity. As Sarah watched Krelvin and his team begin their work, with former protesters now watching warily but without interference, she thought about the nature of peace. It wasn't easy. It wasn't clean. It required constant work, Constant patience, constant willingness to extend trust even when instinct said to withhold it. But it was working. Slowly, imperfectly, painfully, but working. 25 years after the Vratak surrender, Admiral Chen called an emergency session of the Galactic Council. The message was cryptic. Critical information regarding humanity's exile period. Attendance mandatory. The council chamber buzzed with speculation as representatives filed in. What could humanity have kept secret for this long? What revelation could be important enough to warrant such urgency? Chen stood before them, looking older now in his 70s, but still possessing the sharp intelligence that had outmaneuvered the Vratak fleet. Thank you for coming. What I'm about to share has been classified for 300 years. The decision to reveal it now was not made lightly. He activated a holographic display showing a star map of the galaxy during the Convergence Wars. 300 years ago, humanity retreated after the wars devastated our forces. The official history says we limped away to lick our wounds, barely surviving in hidden colonies. That history is incomplete. The display zoomed to show humanity's exile route, highlighting dozens of systems they had passed through. The truth is, we didn't just run and hide. We ran and studied. Every system we passed through, we analyzed. Every species we encountered, we documented. Every technology we found, we cataloged. Our exile wasn't just survival. It was the most comprehensive research expedition in galactic history. Counselor Vexran leaned forward. You're saying humanity has been conducting intelligence operations for 3 centuries? Not intelligence operations, Chen corrected. Scientific study. We weren't spying to gain advantage. We were learning to understand. Because we realized something during the Convergence Wars. We didn't lose because we were weak. We lost because we didn't understand the galaxy we were trying to protect. The display changed, showing something that made every representative gasp. It was a genetic map, but unlike anything they'd seen before, a family tree connecting dozens of galactic species, showing common ancestors, genetic drift, evolutionary branches. We discovered something remarkable, Chen continued. Every sapient species in this galaxy shares common genetic markers. We're all related, distantly but undeniably. Billions of years ago, a precursor species seeded life across these stars. We're not separate species competing for resources. We're cousins, literally family, who forgot our shared origin. Dr. Salentry stood abruptly, all 6 of her hands trembling. That's impossible. The genetic differences are the result of billions of years of adaptation to different environments, Chen finished. But the base code is the same. We ran the analysis thousands of times. The probability of this occurring naturally is essentially 0. Someone designed us. Someone wanted sapient life to flourish across the galaxy. And then they disappeared, leaving us to figure out what to do with their gift. The chamber erupted into chaos. Some representatives denied the findings. Others demanded to see the raw data. A few sat in stunned silence, processing the implications. Prime Counselor Shekral's voice cut through the noise. Ambassador Chen, if this is true, why keep it secret for so long? This information could have prevented countless conflicts. Could it? Chen asked quietly. Think about it, Prime Counselor. If we had revealed this during the height of the Vratak conquests, what would have happened? Would it have stopped the wars, or would it have created new justifications for them? We're all family, so you should submit to our dominance. Or we're all family, so we have the right to eliminate inferior branches. He paused, letting that sink in. We kept it secret because the galaxy wasn't ready. Species were too busy fighting over territory and resources to care about ancient genetic connections. But now, after 25 years of peace, after building institutions that work, after proving that cooperation is possible, now we can have this conversation. Counselor Mirazeth spoke up, her voice thoughtful. What else did you discover during your exile, Ambassador? What other secrets are you keeping? Chen smiled slightly. Nothing that poses any danger. But yes, there are other discoveries. We found remnants of the precursor civilization, not much. Mostly ruins and fragments of technology so advanced we still can't fully understand it. We found evidence of at least 3 other sapient species that went extinct before achieving spaceflight. We found patterns in stellar formation that suggest the galaxy itself might be artificially structured. He held up a hand to forestall the inevitable questions. We're releasing all of this data to the compact scientific community. Full access, no restrictions. Everything we learned in 300 years of study is now yours to analyze, question, and build upon. Because that's what family does. We share what we know. We help each other learn. We grow together. The session that followed lasted for 2 days. Scientists demanded access to the data. Philosophers debated the implications of shared origin. Religious leaders across the galaxy struggled to reconcile this revelation with their beliefs. Politicians calculated how to use this information to strengthen the compact. But beneath all the chaos and excitement, one truth emerged. The galaxy had fundamentally changed. Species that had seen themselves as separate, competing for survival in an indifferent universe, now knew they were part of something larger. Something designed, something intentional. Not everyone embraced this knowledge. Some rejected it outright. Others weaponized it for their own agendas. But for the majority, it became a foundation for something unprecedented, a shared identity that transcended species boundaries. They weren't just aliens sharing a galaxy anymore. They were family, rediscovering each other after billions of years apart. 50 years after the Vratak surrender, Admiral Marcus Chen died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 112. His funeral was attended by representatives from every species in the compact, now numbering 147 and broadcast across the galaxy. But this isn't really a story about Chen's death. It's about what his death revealed about the galaxy he helped create. The funeral took place on Earth, in the same city where the Galactic Council had first convened centuries ago. Leaders arrived from across the stars, and what struck observers was not who came, but how they came. They didn't arrive as separate species, maintaining careful diplomatic distance. They arrived as friends, colleagues, and in many cases, family. Krelvin, now director of the Galactic Engineering Corps, gave one of the eulogies. The elderly Vratak's voice cracked with genuine emotion as he spoke. Admiral Chen gave my species something we didn't deserve and couldn't earn, a second chance. He could have destroyed us. History would have called it justice. Instead, he defeated us and then extended his hand. Everything good in my life, my work, my friendships, my purpose exists because he chose mercy over vengeance. Prime Counselor Shekral spoke next, her scales now dulled with age. The Admiral used to tell me that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of justice. For 50 years, I didn't fully understand what he meant. I do now. Justice isn't punishment. It's the creation of a system where everyone can thrive, where former enemies can become partners, where the cycle of revenge finally breaks. Admiral Chen built that system. Now it's our responsibility to maintain it. But perhaps the most moving eulogy came from someone unexpected. Marcus Wade, the former leader of the Purity Front, who had blockaded Terminus Isk decades earlier. Now an old man himself, Wade approached the podium with slow, careful steps. I hated Admiral Chen once, Wade said bluntly. I thought he had betrayed humanity by welcoming our former enemies. I thought peace was weakness. I thought trust was foolishness. I was wrong about all of it. He paused, collecting himself. 25 years ago, my grandson was born with a rare genetic disorder. The only specialist who could treat it was a Vratak doctor, one of Krelvin's team members, actually. I almost refused, almost let my grandson suffer because of my pride. But my daughter overruled me. She took him to that Vratak doctor, and you know what happened? The doctor saved his life. Worked for 3 days straight. Used techniques developed by combining human and Vratak medicine and saved my grandson's life. Wade's eyes were wet now. That doctor didn't have to try so hard. My family had protested his presence on Terminus 6. We'd made his life difficult. But he saved my grandson anyway. And when I tried to thank him, tried to apologize for my past behavior, you know what he said? He said, Admiral Chen taught me that we honor the dead by protecting the living. Your grandson is alive. That's all the thanks I need. Wade looked at Chen's casket, covered in the flags of 100 worlds. Admiral Chen was right about everything. Peace isn't weakness. Trust isn't foolishness. And family isn't just the people who look like you. It's the people who stand with you when it matters. I wish I had understood that sooner. I wish I could tell him I understand now. But I can do the next best thing. I can teach my grandson. I can make sure the next generation doesn't make my mistakes." After the eulogies, they buried Chen in a simple grave in a memorial park. No massive monument, no ostentatious display, just a simple marker with his name, dates, and one line. He kept the promise. But as representatives departed Earth, returning to their home worlds, they carried with them something more valuable than any monument: Chen's vision of what the galaxy could be. And they carried the determination to keep building it. 100 years after the Vratak surrender, the galaxy celebrated the compact centennial. The memorial station at Sector 447 hosted the largest gathering of species in galactic history, representatives from over 200 worlds, including dozens of species that hadn't even achieved spaceflight when the compact began. Cadet Yuki Tanaka, the young officer who had spoken briefly with Admiral Chen at the memorial station's dedication, was now Fleet Admiral Tanaka, the highest-ranking military officer in the compact. At 65, she stood before the assembled representatives and told a different kind of story. 100 years ago, my great-great-grandmother left Earth on a generation ship, fleeing the aftermath of the Convergence Wars. She died in transit, never seeing the exile colonies. My great-grandfather was born in space, raised in hiding, trained for a war he thought would never end. My grandfather served in Admiral Chen's fleet, present at the Vratak surrender. My mother was in the first mixed species class at the Defense Academy. She gestured to a young officer standing nearby. "This is my daughter, Lieutenant Commander Akira Tanaka Vrel. Her father is Yundari. She represents the first generation born into a galaxy that has never known major war. She has friends of 40 different species. She speaks 6 languages fluently. She thinks the idea of conquering other species is not just wrong, but incomprehensible." Admiral Tanaka's voice grew stronger. "That's the real victory. Not the military defeat of the Vratak, not the establishment of the compact, but the creation of a generation that can't imagine going back to the old ways. A generation for whom peace is normal and cooperation is expected." She pulled up a holographic display showing galactic statistics. "In the past century, we've seen the founding of 67 joint research stations, 32 mixed species colonies, and over 500 cultural exchange programs. Interspecies marriage, once virtually unknown, is now common. Over 12 million individuals currently identify as mixed heritage, combining genetic lines from different species. The precursor revelation showed us we're all family, but we're making it true in practice. We're not just related by ancient genetic connections. We're building actual relationships, actual families, actual bonds that cross species boundaries. That's Admiral Chen's true legacy. Not the military victory, but the peace that made everything else possible." The celebration that followed lasted for a week. Joint military exercises demonstrated capabilities that would have seemed impossible a century before. Cultural performances showcased art forms that blended traditions from dozens of worlds. Scientific symposiums presented discoveries made possible only through cross-species collaboration. On the final day, they unveiled a new addition to the memorial station, the Hall of Promises. It contained not just memorials to the fallen, but commitments from every member species to the principles of the compact. Each species had contributed something: a work of art, a historical artifact, a piece of technology representing their commitment to the shared future. The Vratak contribution was particularly striking. A massive sculpture created from melted-down weapons, transformed into a tree whose branches reached toward the stars. At its base, a plaque read, "From instruments of conquest to symbols of growth. May we never forget the cost of tyranny or the value of redemption." As the ceremony concluded and representatives began to disperse, a young Vratak approached Admiral Tanaka. "Admiral, may I speak with you?" "Of course," Tanaka replied, recognizing the distinctive markings of Krektar's genetic line. "How can I help you?" "My name is Shektar. I'm War Marshal Krektar's great-great-grandson. I'm about to enter the Defense Academy, and I wanted to ask, do humans still hate us for what my ancestor did?" Tanaka considered the question carefully. "Some probably do. Pain doesn't disappear just because time passes. But most humans, if they think about the Vratak at all, Think about the species that changed, that chose redemption, that became our partners. She smiled at the young Vratak. Your great-great-grandfather made terrible choices, but he also made the right choice when it mattered most. He surrendered instead of fighting. He faced justice instead of fleeing, and his descendants have spent a century proving that species can change. You don't carry his guilt, Shektar. You carry the opportunity he bought with his surrender. What you do with that opportunity is up to you. I want to serve in the peacekeeping forces, Shektar said. I want to help protect the compact, to prove that Vratak can be guardians instead of conquerors. Then welcome to the Defense Academy, Tanaka replied. Work hard, learn well, and remember, you're not defined by what your ancestors did. You're defined by what you choose to do. 200 years after the Vratak surrender, historians look back on what they now called the Great Transformation, the period when the galaxy shifted from a collection of competing species to a true interstellar civilization. The statistics were impressive. 0 major wars in 2 centuries, the longest period of sustained peace in galactic history. Economic prosperity had reached even the most distant worlds. Scientific advancement had accelerated exponentially through cooperation. Life expectancy across all species had increased by an average of 30%. But the real transformation wasn't captured in statistics. It was visible in the small moments. A human child and a Vratak child playing together at a mixed-species school, neither noticing or caring about their differences. A Yundari scientist and a Helian engineer solving a problem neither could have solved alone. Their collaboration so natural they barely remembered their species had once been at war. A memorial service for Convergence War's casualties, attended by descendants of both sides, mourning together and promising together that such conflicts would never happen again. An elderly former soldier, once a member of Krektar's fleet, teaching young cadets about the horrors of conquest and the value of peace. His testimony more powerful than any history book. The galaxy had learned, slowly and painfully, the lesson humanity tried to teach 300 years ago, that cooperation is stronger than conquest, that diversity is stronger than uniformity, and that peace is not the absence of conflict but the presence of justice. Admiral Marcus Chen's grave on Earth had become a pilgrimage site, visited by beings of every species. They came to honor the human who had kept his promise, who had shown that even after the darkest night dawn could break, who had proven that mercy could be strength and that former enemies could become family. The simple marker still read, "He kept the promise." But someone had added something beneath it, in a dozen languages. And so will we. That's the real ending of this story. Not with a great battle or a dramatic sacrifice, but with a promise kept across generations, with species that chose cooperation over competition, understanding over fear, and hope over despair. The Vratak had believed humanity was extinct. They were wrong. But more importantly, they were wrong about what made humanity dangerous. It wasn't our weapons or our fleets or our technology. It was our stubborn, irrational, utterly human belief that a better galaxy was possible, that species could change, that peace could last, that promises made in the darkest times could be kept in the brightest. Humanity had been silent for 300 years, but when we finally spoke, we didn't just end a war. We began a peace that would echo across the stars for millennia to come, and that, more than any military victory, was humanity's greatest triumph. The end a reminder to the galaxy. We are strongest together. We are safest when we protect each other. We are greatest when we lift each other up. This is humanity's promise, humanity's fury, and humanity's hope. May it never be forgotten.